Okay, welcome to Micro Lecture 7.1. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court today. And it's going to be a little different than some of the previous things because I'm trying to give you snapshots of information that, while it's certainly out there, it's not something that we commonly see put together. And I'm trying to give you a little bit of a perspective to think about the court, perhaps in different ways than the traditional way we're looking at. Having said that, of course, what's the traditional way we look at the court? We typically will hear people say there is a liberal group on the court and there is a conservative group on the court. So you see the four liberal justices, Sotomayor, Ginsburg, Kagan, Breyer, and you see the five conservative justices on the court, Thomas, Gorsuch, Alito, Kavanaugh, and Roberts. I don't think those are actually very accurate terms, but it's certainly how we tend to view the court. We say, all right, well, the court, you hear people say the court's very liberal or the court's very conservative. I think you have to focus on the issues of what you're talking about and understand how they're reading the Constitution to get a closer appreciation. I talked about that in a previous lecture, but let's not look at the political philosophy so much as their background, which helps inform that political philosophy. First of all, how different are they from one another? Are they really radically different people? So this is a breakdown of the current court. You'll notice that the age breakdown varies between Justice Ginsburg, who is 86, all the way down to Justice Gorsuch, who is 52. I also included on that list who appointed them. So you've got Trump, of course, has appointed Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch. I also included the religion because I think this is an interesting aspect of looking at the Supreme Court. You'll notice that with the exception of Gorsuch, who was actually raised Catholic, everybody on the court is a Catholic or a Jew. Now, that's not to be critical of either religion, and that's not to say that somehow makes them fundamentally different, but it makes their approach informed by their religiosity. So the fact that you have no Baptists on the court, no agnostics on the court, no Buddhists on the court, is going to lead a certain flavor to how they interpret things. For example, the very contentious debate that this country is going through about abortion and possibly the death penalty. The other last little tidbit I included on that slide was where they got their law degree. Now, lawyers, of course, will get an undergraduate degree and then they'll go to the law school. And again, you'll notice how really rarefied or really set apart from the general population these people are, in that all of them, well, 8 of them went to either Harvard or Yale, which are arguably the two most elite Ivy League institutions in the United States. Justice Ginsburg went to Columbia, which is also considered an Ivy League institution. So everybody went to Ivy League. Nobody got their degree at Wake Tech, which is sad. And certainly, again, this is going to inform how they experience the world and how they rule. I wanted to include some numbers here. What are they worth? And then I want to talk about a little bit of a statistical thing. You'll notice that they really vary in wealth, their net worth. Now, they're all making somewhere around, I think a justice in the Supreme Court earns about $225,000 a year. But you'll notice that their worth at the high end, Sotomayor, Ginsburg, Breyer, 16, 6 million, 5 million, 4 million, down to the two poorest, if you could use that term, justices, Justice Thomas and Justice Kavanaugh. Now, if you were to contrast that, here are two numbers to look at. And these are interesting numbers because I think they, again, tell us something. If you said, well, what's the mean, or this is what most people think of, the average wealth of all Americans? Well, the average wealth of all Americans is a $692,000. So you might be able to say, well, Justice Thomas, Justice Kavanaugh, that's pretty close to what the average person has. But you have to be careful using mean. Mean is you include all your data points. So you include people like Jeff Bezos, who arguably would be worth $1 trillion, and the poorest person, and you come up with an average. Well, that tells you something. but perhaps, and the median number, okay, which is often a more useful um, thing to look at, is the important number here. Median is the middle value in the list. And that, I think, probably gives you a better gauge of how much Americans are worth than these numbers. But still, these numbers are interesting, I think. Pardon my dog. Um, so again, I broke it down here. I also broke down, are they married? We only have one single justice on the Supreme Court, if you don't include Justice Ginsburg, whose widow, her husband died not too long ago. Justice Kagan has never been married. I also included sexual orientation, so long as I have no evidence that any of the people in the Supreme Court are gay or bisexual or have come out in any way. So we have, again, 8 married and 9 straight individuals on the court, which again is not completely reflective of the United States. A lot of people aren't married, for example. So it's that makes it unusual. Now I also included, if I could find it, and this was a little difficult, their ethnicity that they self-identify as. Or if I could find some linkage to a country. So you'll notice that I included Sotomayor, I classified as Hispanic because she self-identifies as Hispanic. Beyer is Jewish, self-identifies as such. Ginsburg identifies as Jewish, but I did find some information that her parents were both from Russia, so I thought it was appropriate to include Russian. Alito is a descendant of Italians. Gorsuch comes from the English. Kavanaugh is Irish. Roberts is Irish and Welsh. So again, you'll notice that there's some people that are off that list completely. You only have one black or one African American on that list. You only have one Hispanic on that list, which is not representative of the prosecution or of the population. The final thing I included on that list, which I thought was of interest to you, or should be of interest to you, is, were they ever defense attorneys or were they prosecutors? So you'll notice if there's a no there, that means they were never a defense attorney. And you'll notice we have no defense attorneys that are sitting on the Supreme Court. And 3 of them are actually ex-prosecutors. So again, doesn't mean they can't be fair, doesn't mean they're not biased, but it does inform how they make decisions. Now, unfortunately, this is only a 5-minute lecture, or 10-minute lecture, so we can't have to go too far, but I did want to take a look in the next slide here of what about the state courts? What are they like? And I found a wonderful report on the diversity of the Supreme Courts of different states, and I did want to include 2 kind of graphs here to set the discussion. First of all, this chart over here, if you look at the national population, approximately 30% of the national population are white males, but they constitute 56% of those sitting on the courts. If you look at the white women, they're about 29% of the population. They're about 31%. That's reversed. They're 31% of the population, and they're 29% of the judges. Men of color, women of color, you'll notice that they are about 19 or 20% of the population each, but they are only 8 or 7% of the people on the bench. And then, because sometimes I think the South gets a bit of a bad rap, if you look at the map of the United States over here, this is courts that have no justice of color on their Supreme Court, on their highest court, because it goes by different names. First of all, you notice that New England is what we would call in the bad old days lily white, as is the upper Midwest and the West. Now the deep Cotton South, Alabama, Arkansas, yes, there's no person of color there, but I think it's instructive that when we start talking about diversity, not to fall into the trap that diversity can only be looked at from a lens of black and white or north and south. Hope you enjoyed this quick micro lecture on what some interesting ideas or facts about the Supreme Court, and We'll pick up with our next lecture, micro lecture 7.2, whenever you click on the button.